Welcome back to Squawk on the Street. The Trump administration saying it'll keep using former President Biden's tough rules for merger reviews. The existing guidelines outline more than a dozen criteria the FTC and the DOJ use to determine whether to block a merger and have been criticized by corporations since their adoption in 2023. Joining us to discuss this morning, Mozelle Thompson, former FTC commissioner. Mozelle, great to have you on the show again. Good to see you.
Good morning, Carl.
We had some discussion about this morning with Kramer about, is this a bit of pulling the rug under those who thought this would be a new era of M&A?
Well, look, I think the market anticipated more merger activity, and there's still a lot of activity and people researching mergers, and the lawyers are busy and other things, but you haven't seen a lot of deals yet. And I think because there's still uncertainty out there. And I think part of what they did with the merger guidelines is and it was a very strong emphasis in the statements of the antitrust enforcers, is they were going to keep the merger guidelines because they wanted to create uncertainty, eliminate uncertainty, to have some stability. I think that's important. Now, the question becomes, how do they interpret the new guidelines? You know, these merger guidelines broaden the kinds of things that are being looked at, which means that the parties who seek to merge are still going to have to produce a lot of information and a lot of analysis. Now, how the agencies wind up interpreting them and how they wind up, whether they wind up taking action against certain proposed mergers has yet to be seen. So you see a little bit of they're trying to get a degree of stability, but I don't think they've gotten there yet. And I think part of the wrench that was thrown into the works yesterday was the president's executive order, which he expects to have the executive branch essentially take over all of the independent agencies.
Right.
So the combination of both creates some market uncertainty and uneasiness.
Well, do you think the bias then is to be more permissive or the opposite?
I think it's very interesting. I don't know what the policy is, and I think it will depend a lot on the industry and what their interest is in that industry. There's no clear indication that they intend to let up on tech, for example, that they've looked at the tech industry, and the vice president and others have been critics of the tech industry. So we should see where that goes, whether they want to have more mergers and, more importantly, more enforcement actions in that area. That's yet to be seen. So stay tuned for the news at 11.
Mozelle, this sort of strikes me. I just have two questions. One is, why do you think that they're deciding to hold on to these rules? I think obviously that was a surprise for many. And then secondarily, just sort of from the way government works, could it be revised again? Could the president change his mind?
Absolutely. And I think that with the executive order that came out yesterday, the higher proposed concentration of power within the executive branch and the president to make those decisions. Don't forget, these agencies have a couple of different roles. First is to look at mergers. Second, to look at enforcement, how companies behave. And third is to develop policy about what they think the proper economic conditions are. Now, traditionally, that's done by independent agencies. The idea now that that's going to be funneled back through OMB and policy conditions set by the National Economic Council is a bit different. So we don't know how that's going to play out yet.
Mozelle, I wonder if, and this conversation kind of dovetails with what's happening with civil service employment. If we end up with administrations that don't have that bridge between administrations, right? Do we just lurch from swing election to swing election, change election to change election when it comes to things like M&A policy?
Well, Carl, this is unprecedented. Not the merger guidelines. Those can always be changed, and they've gone through various iterations since they first were enacted decades ago. But it takes time to do that. But if there's a policy pronouncement, for example, that the White House is concerned about a certain industry or certain companies, and that they ask the independent agencies to go after them, that would be unprecedented. And I think that would be a test of what the executive power is.